Welcome to the third in the series of the Pharma Innovation Summit panels looking at the future of pharma in 2025. I'm delighted to have a kind of a diverse group of folks on this panel. Rather than me telling you much about them, maybe if we could ask you, each of you, to go and tell us something about who you are and who you represent. So maybe Carine, could I start with you?
Well, yeah, thank you, Mike. So I'm Carinne Brouillon. I'm the head of human pharma at Boehringer Ingelheim since a little less than a year. I'm nearly 30 years in the industry, both in diagnostics and in pharm, and with 21 years at J&J. So I'm happy to be here on the panel and discuss 2025.
Thank you. And Edward?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. And I'm Edward Hæggström. I'm a former physics professor, and now I'm the CEO of Nanoform. I don't have as much time in the industry as my esteemed colleagues. I've been working on issues related to bioavailability for the last 10 years. Before that, I worked on applied physics, a lot of medical devices and stuff like that.
Thank you. And Rob?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for the invitation to be here. So I'm a 30-plus year veteran of clinical development. I'm a clinical trialist. I have worked on a lot of very large studies, up to 30,000 patients. And in recent years, have spent my time thinking about how we can make drug development easier through the use of digital innovation and big data. My last role, full-time role, was Chief Medical Officer at AbbVie. And now I'm retired, and I spend my time on about 5 different boards in companies of different sizes.
Yes, it's one of those retirements. Yeah, fantastic. No, thank each of you, and certainly there's a sense of diversity of opinion and thought and background here. So I'd be very keen to exploit that diversity as we go through. So I guess the first question is, as we sit here today, as 2020 comes to a close, let's look forward to 2025. What do we think will be different by the time that we get there? Maybe if we can do the same order through, and Carine, if you want to kick us off, and then we'll make this interactive.
So 2025, I hope COVID will be behind us, and we will have taken all the learnings of what we are going through, and that we will benefit from those learnings, including in our jobs. So how we work and how we can do things more efficiently. When it comes to clinical development, there is a lot to be done and a lot to be learned. So I'm really hopeful that in 2025, we will have made really big leaps in decision-making. And really, how do we choose endpoints, designs, etc., with the help of technology and AI and all that, but also in patient access and getting their input and the collaboration and close partnership to be able to really develop drugs that make sense for them.
Yeah, and what do you think that we have learned this year that we'll keep as we go?
I think we have learned, A, to use technology much more than what we used to do. B, to have teams input, like at least in my company, which is German company, very process oriented, etc. We have learned to have much faster loops and getting input from much more directions at the same time rather than going sequentially. So that's something that I hope we will keep.
Fantastic. Edward, 2025.
Well, as a tech platform guy, I absolutely believe that there will be advances on the tech side. Rob is going to talk about AI. Suffice it to say, I think it will bring in new aspects. I think that what I represent is really to think that physics can bring something to biochemistry, and it's a position I have been preparing for and sort of thinking about for a long time. And just as a very simple example, when you make things smaller, you get new properties, and you can get them without changing the chemistry. And I think that's a very interesting value proposition from a platform way of thinking. So what I really try to work towards, and what I hope would be there at least partially in 2025, is an ability to make a contribution across a large spectrum of assets using this approach. And I think here I talk both as a scientist and as a commercial person.
Fantastic. Rob?
So I think, just to summarize it in one sentence, everything's going to be different in 2025. And we're looking at some gathering macro scale, macroeconomic forces here. The first one is that which is good for the industry, is that with the increasing impact of the aging of the population, we're going to see that creating new opportunities and growing the pharma market. But other really strong forces are the entry of China and India into the more innovative side of drug development and wanting to provide innovative medicines to their citizens. The third macroeconomic force is going to be the rise of big tech in the pharma industry, and we're increasingly seeing big tech get involved in healthcare verticals. Another thing that's going to happen is that the pharma industry has really been behind in terms of digital innovation. We've been very slow moving, particularly in R&D, and now we're starting to see the floodgates open. So there is going to be this massive wave of digital innovation. We're seeing it already. And perhaps later on, I won't monopolize the conversation. I'll talk about the 6 big buckets where I think digital innovation is going to change drug development. So, but basically, everything is changing pretty fast right now.
Excellent. And when you talk about digital innovation, you mean not just that we're going to bring through digital therapeutics, but the role that it will play in discovery and development and commercial?
Yeah, so it's everything from the use of digital innovation in discovery, whether it's genomics, whether it's AI in terms of designing better molecules, the use of digital innovation in clinical development, the 6 big buckets that I'll talk about, the use of big data, how we market drugs, and then also there will be digital therapeutics, but increasingly regular drugs will come along with a digital environment that helps the physician treat and manage the patient. So we're going to see this happening everywhere.
Interesting. So, open it up to conversation. So some of those things are available today. How do we see, what do we see as the barriers to adoption in 2020, if that's not a sort of leading question?
So perhaps I'll just get everybody's creative juices going here. I think the biggest barrier for me, and the one that I've spent a lot of time working on, is our own internal mindset and the feeling that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We know how to do this. So just getting people to change their mindset and be open to innovation and doing things differently, I think that's the biggest barrier right now. It certainly isn't regulators, and it certainly isn't opportunity.
Yeah.
Carine? And I totally agree. I spend most of my time working on mindset and making sure that people see the realm of opportunities, being it indeed digital therapeutics, digital biomarkers, et cetera, et cetera. It is hard to change. And this is what I was referring to, the benefit of the COVID crisis, is that I see that as a change accelerator that we absolutely need to reinforce. And for me, that's one of the biggest leadership challenges that we have. Our leaders have grown through the industry, like the kind of the traditional way. And I was talking about tech companies and others coming in. I'm hopeful that with that blending a little bit, we will have a new type of leaders who will be able to connect those dots that for the moment we have a hard time doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the interesting thing has been, pharma traditionally has appointed people who have been on top of this kind of pyramid of knowing everything, and with this kind of flood of things where no one person could understand everything. I guess that cultural change is critical to that adoption.
Absolutely.
I would like to bring in a little bit other aspect. I don't disagree with anything being said, but I think there is a increasing complexity, both from the sort of biochemistry point of view and also from the, let's call it, digital point of view. And when you combine these two, you get complex to the complex power. And then you sort of mix that in with fake news and people who want to sort of simplify everything. Large swaths of people who basically don't believe data. And I think that these are enormous numbers of people, as we saw, for instance, in the US election. And to me, it creates a very interesting scenario where you, in one way, you become more refined. Let's talk about personalized medicine number, third coming or something. And then on the other side, it seems that the human animal wants to become less refined, less believe in the sort of scientific approach. And I've been thinking a lot of what does this really mean? Of course, there will be people who buy and use drugs, who are well educated and sort of follow the traditional model. But I think there will be a lot of people who choose not to believe the data. And then basically we say, look, we make better medicines because we use more data. And I think this is an interesting way of sort of thinking about it. What does it mean to us as players in the industry?
I think you're touching on something that actually Mike and I have spent quite a lot of time working on together over the last year. And that is the fact that patients and the public don't trust the pharma industry. They don't trust, increasingly, they don't trust their own physicians. They don't trust the pharma industry. And I think as people in the pharma industry, we really need to spend more time about building that trust. And so Mike and I work on with Bioethics International, and we've spent some time on other activities thinking about how do you increase trust from the general public.
I guess one of the things probably to this openness, this kind of cultural shift, will be the recognition of the kind of patient value in there as well, because I think that there probably is something in that sense that we have developed drugs that are adjacent to what they want, but not the same as what they want. I'm going to suggest, Rob, PCSK9s would be one of those, right? Where there's clear unmet medical need that no one seemed to want when it got there. So it's an interesting thing. So I guess just a sort of follow-on question is, what are you starting now that you don't expect to really have an impact until 2025? Are there programs that are underway that that we won't see coming?
Well, I don't know when it's jumping in, but I wouldn't say programs. I would say transformation. We need to transform, and in my case, the transformation I'm really trying to drive is around leadership, mindset, and ways of working. It's less around the technicalities. And yes, we do have projects like, health data ecosystems projects or whatever that is around data, around AI, because that's now kind of a must. But it's really having the people able to drive that and able to drive the decision making in that environment. So for me, the key today is to transform the organization along the technical and the environmental change that we're going through. And I tend to agree also with Edward on taking the kind of the global population's mindset also inside, because we're always talking about patients, but what about prevention and having healthy people changing their behaviors and all that kind of stuff that is out there. So for me, it's really around a real transformation on how we do things.
Yeah, and I would love to know more about kind of a German company mindset shift as well. I suspect it's different than a US mindset shift. But do you see the kind of the people who are there needing to go through a mindset shift, or do you need fresh, perspectives, or will pharma be hiring people that it's never hired before?
All of the above, I would say. Like, yes, there are people who are able to change, and the younger generations, of course, are very enthusiastic. And it's not necessarily a matter of age, but a matter of like formatting and the time you spent into a role or into a function. But you have people who are, of course, saying we are very successful. Why would we change now?
Hmm. Hmm.
I think we're. Sorry, Edward, why don't you carry on?
I would like to pick up on something that Carine said. I've been thinking about that the way people look at specialists. This has been changing. I have seen on panels people who come there, they Google before the panel, and then they say, yeah, I've been interested in this for a few years and I have a lot of opinions. And then they get on TV or whatever, and a lot of people believe they are actually specialists. And I would assume that for an industry that is dealing with a complex matter, the interaction between the drug and the human body, that actually needs a pretty deep understanding. And then one could say that either we have it or we don't have it. The role of a specialist, both one that wants to become one, one who claims to be one, or one who basically thinks, I'm not a specialist, but I want to be part of the social conversation. I would like to bring into this conversation that the role of the specialist is changing as we speak for many reasons. So, social media being one, Wikipedia being one. And the fact that the specialist is one of the fundamental building blocks of the industry, this must have an impact. I don't know exactly what kind of impact it will have, but to me, it's absolutely clear that it must have an impact. And the kind of classical way of looking at the specialist, I'm not sure it's there anymore, at least not 100%.
It's an interesting perspective. I'm currently supposed to be writing a book, and I'm stuck in the middle of it, which is it's called "Who Do You Ask When No One Knows?" Because a lot of the processes that we have are essentially based on asking people who do know, right? And a lot of our research is based on that. But the idea that there are questions that no one knows the answer to leans into that sort of question of who are the experts in the future, who are the experts in putting technologies together where you've got disciplines. So I guess to Carine's point about the kind of mindset shift that in any pharma company, is there a specialist? But yeah, Robert, I know you were about to comment as well.
Yeah, what I was about to say is that 5 years from now, so at the moment we're seeing innovation breaking out in lots of different areas, and we're seeing companies start to develop new ideas, new concepts in terms of digital innovation in drug development, the pharma industry in general. I think 5 years from now, that will have built to the point where we start to see the virtual cycle where each one of these is feeding on the other. And then I see that the rate of progress will suddenly accelerate. At the moment, we're in the phase of Gartner's hype hypothesis, where we've gone past that it's all hype now to where there are actually things happening that are real and are changing things. But we will see that curve accelerate, and it's going to start to look like Moore's law. In fact, if we look at publications around the use of digital techniques in drug development, they're doubling every year now. So we're definitely in a Moore's law stage of digital innovation in drug development.
Yeah, and there's an increasing sophistication and maturity there too. I recorded a couple of weeks ago with the CNS Summit Innovation Index, which looks at the kind of digital space. 3 years ago when we were doing this, it was apps. Everyone had an app, and no one used any of them. But now it's actually proper, deeply embedded, meaningful stuff. So I think that curve is also one of maturity and sophistication as well, for sure. I feel like, Rob, I want to dig into what these 6 buckets are, just to allow us to riff off that as well, if you don't mind.
Sure. So the 6 buckets in drug development are, firstly, the rise of the use of social media and web platforms for a variety of things, including patient engagement and finding patients. The second one that everybody's very excited about is the use of wearables, sensors, and the Internet of Things that will increasingly allow us to capture information in clinical trials passively rather than requiring an investigator to write it down. And the use of electronic medical records as a way of capturing data will accelerate that. The next one is predictive analytics and big data, whether it's to replace clinical trials or to design better clinical trials or to run clinical trials in a better fashion with more remote monitoring and the use of AI to identify problems before you're aware of them. The fourth bucket is the rise of a digital ecosystem for patients and sites that make participating in clinical trials much easier. And you can imagine how a digital ecosystem can wrap in all of the other components that I'm talking about. But this digital ecosystem will go beyond clinical trials. So increasingly, companies will think about a digital offering that's part of the labeling of the product and as part of the commercial environment when they sell it. A big factor in how expensive it'll be to run clinical trials, and one that COVID is accelerating, is the rise of virtual clinical trials. And clinical trials will start to fall into a continuum of not virtual at all, which will rapidly disappear, to virtualized clinical trials and then fully virtual clinical trials. And then the last bucket is pharma companies' internal digital ecosystems that make it easier for them to conduct clinical trials. And the integration of all of their systems into that digital ecosystem. The use of robotic process automation to get rid of manual repetitive tasks that take a lot of manpower but actually don't really need a human being involved in it at all. The use of artificial intelligence to better understand what's going on in your clinical trials, predict success and where they're going. So those are the 6 big buckets that are very relevant right now for clinical development.
Yeah.
Rob, may I comment on that? I'm probably sort of totally out in the woods, but one thing that came to my mind is, how about if we talk about digital prevention as a way to get rid of the chemical assets? So let me be more practical. If one exercise more, the number of cardiovascular indications go down, at least first. That means that you don't have to take heart medicine. Of course, then when you live longer because you do this, then maybe the need for the chemistry comes back. There is a lot of apps and everything for it, but somehow I like the idea of digital prevention. It was mentioned earlier in this talk, and I also like the idea that digital has a very, very light green footprint, I believe, compared to a chemical footprint. Just as a thought, I don't know if it's right or wrong.
No, it's a really great thought. And in fact, you're predicting the present, because there are now digital systems that run as apps that help manage diabetic patients, and people are actually able to charge for those. So it's not preventing disease altogether, but these apps do prevent complications amongst diabetics by improving diabetic control. So it's lifestyle modification to some extent, and exactly what you're talking about.
I'd be interested, Carine, I think just building on those 6 buckets as well, to think about, does this lead to changes in the pharma model? If we're able to, enrich the clinical process, if we're able to, charge different amounts of money for value, or measure once things are launched, how do we also get the opportunity to reimagine, the pharmaceutical model per se?
Well, we will have to reimagine the pharmaceutical model. I think this is the thing is how and when, and towards well, there are already outcome-based contracting. There are already some stuff. The thing is that the industry cannot move in isolation. The insurance industry has to move, the payers have to be open, the governments have to integrate. For example, when we're talking about the couple between digital therapeutics and pharmaceutical therapeutics, we have to have things that work together. We're currently working on solutions in psychiatry where you could absolutely imagine to have both together and reimbursed together as a package. Work to be done. I'm absolutely hopeful that in the future the model will evolve and we will have the value will really be through the impact that you have, being it only pharmaceutical or through a variety of means. And then the complexity will be, because we see it already in oncology with combinations, for example, who gets the reward for the value. So
right.
that's going to be another conundrum that we will have to solve. But this is where it's heading, so we will have to solve it.
Yeah. So do we see
Abraham Lincoln had some advice for that for us, the pharma industry, in thinking about all of these changes. And what he said is the best way to predict the future is to create it. So I think we really need to create that.
Totally agree with you, Rob. Totally agree.
Yeah. But I guess, I mean, if you took that idea, Abraham Lincoln's idea forward, I think that idea of, I mean, let's say you went into neuroscience, which is one of those areas where we've kind of struggled with, you know, essentially empirical practice and 100-year-old disease classifications. I think if you start to bring these things together, it's imaginable that you could have a kind of, you know, precision medicine, neuroscience future, which is within reach, and so that kind of thing starts to feel like a different way of showing value, of recruitment, and so forth in the chain.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to and yes, DSM-5 is super important in psychiatry, and it structures how we operate today. But there are other ways of thinking about those patients. And not necessarily thinking in terms of buckets, but really thinking in terms of patients.
Yeah, better diagnosis, better you know, management of
and using all the wealth data that we have and that we collect through, like Rob was saying, being it wearables or being it everything we have, phones, etc.
Yeah, interesting. So if there was a, you know, a change in pharma stroke biotech, because I was fascinated by the difference between companies that think that they're biotechs and companies that think that they're pharma companies. You know, there's a lot of opportunity for change in things like marketing. I mean, commercial discovery. You know, the kind of the drug delivery sort of piece. You know, what technologies do we really expect, as well as digital, to really drive into our industry, and also, you know, how do we reimagine this model?
I think we need to be open to all types of technology. It goes from 3D printing to for like, well, we already know it's in development for hips and like, you know, when you have a new hip or a new knee, or maybe it will once be okay for a pill to be 3D printed. I don't know. There's a lot of things that we can imagine. I was struck by the collaboration between Tesla and CureVac, for example, on the vaccine, on the COVID vaccine distribution model. I think these are exactly the type of things that we're going to see more and more coming, and we need to be ready for that. And some will win in a space, some will win in another space. The balance will have to be found. But there are some cool stuff going on, to be honest. And if we stay passive and just wait and think our model is working, then we'll probably not be relevant in 5 to 10 years from now.
I think the focus of pharma and biotech on orphan diseases and rare diseases has enabled pharma to get around this problem of the increasing cost of drug promotion and competition. So focusing on areas where there isn't a big impact to payers because there's a small number of patients, but where you can charge a very high price. I think that strategy is not going to last for very much longer as the number of orphan diseases expands and the number of patients who have some condition that's not awfully common. Taken in aggregate, it's a huge amount, and precision medicine is fueling some of that. Eventually, this concept that we'll only market drugs to small groups of patients where we can charge $150,000, $250,000 a year is not going to work anymore, and we will have to come back to dealing with chronic diseases of high prevalence, and we're going to have to find more cost-effective ways to be able to do that because the overall budget impact is going to be high.
Yeah.
So Mike, I'd like to bring two things to the discussion, if I may. One is a little bit far-fetched, and the other one maybe is not. We were thinking about where we could be in 2025 or a little bit beyond, and then we were talking a little bit about orphan drugs and stuff like that. I would like to bring up the question of space medicine, and usually when I do it, people laugh. But I think space medicine, it's a very intriguing area because to me it's clear there will be more people who are not on this globe. The only thing we don't know is when. And I've been thinking about, like, what does it mean when you are in a low gravitation environment, higher radiation background? You are in an environment for which the human body has not been by evolution sort of adapted and maximized, and this presents for a entirely new way of sort of thinking about how the drug and the human biology interacts. So I would like to bring this, and I'm sure there is not a lot of business in the beginning. On the other hand, the guys who will be interested in space medicine are the ones who can pay for the rocket ticket. So maybe it still would be of interest. And this would be sort of combine the orphan thinking, very few, with the very expensive, with the very new. And the novelty does not come maybe from the zero gravity or maybe from the radiation, but from the fact that we are treating the human body when it is in a situation for which it has not been optimized.
I wasn't expecting to go to space medicine, Edward, but that's a very interesting. I know there's a company that is doing exactly that because of I think we have a collaboration with the International Space Station to study, the effects on, say, bone and the muscle loss in space while they're there. So they are clinical trial subjects as well as scientists. But no, I think so. Rob, I'm interested in building on that because it is the suggestion that we also need to be thinking about ways of driving, costs down within our industry at the same time.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I've been so interested in digital innovation is the ability to run trials in a more cost-effective way, be able to run smaller trials by using better digital endpoints, reduce the amount of human intervention that's required in clinical trials. And some of this has been fueled by the fact that I spent most of my life in cardiovascular drug development. And that used to be the biggest area of investment for the industry. And now it's the smallest area. And the reason for that is that these diseases of high prevalence and chronicity just cannot attract the same sort of price for pharma drugs. We saw with the PCSK9 inhibitors how innovation in that space didn't meet with commercial success. So the ability to develop drugs more cost effectively, not spend $2.6 billion per each successful drug, will enable us to do some developments in areas that are still the largest causes of morbidity and mortality worldwide. I did want to make the point that the one environment the human body is not adapted for and causes a lot of illness is the supermarket, right?
I like to think.
Yeah. If I may, there is also another model that we could look at is mutualization of means. And if you look at what was just launched, like the AMR fund from a lot of companies and other players to try to like generate new drugs, antibiotics, because we have that multi-resistance issue that's coming. That's another evolution of the model that could also be seen more in the future.
Yeah, and I think another learning from this year is that sort of X Prize-like pot for the COVID vaccines or therapeutics has driven a lot of companies into a singular space. So it does feel like. But Rob, I'd be interested. If we had launched PCSK9s at $1,000 per patient per year, do we think that we would have seen a different uptake in of those medicines?
There clearly is a very large unmet medical need for more effective cholesterol management, and cardiovascular disease is still the biggest killer of people worldwide, more than all forms of cancer combined. So there is a need. Most people don't reach their goals in terms of cholesterol. So it clearly is a need. I think the payers drove a lot of resistance, and they're quite capable of changing prescribing habits because of the price that it was launched at. I'm not sure that generation of PCSK9 inhibitors was ever going to be sold at a price where, $3,500 a year, for instance, where they could have been highly successful. But the next generation of drugs, small interfering RNA, cheaper to produce, longer dosing intervals, and then there will be small molecules as well, I think will actually bring PCSK9 into the mainstream of cardiovascular prevention.
It's interesting. And I guess, Carine, in the position that you're in, a lot of companies are successful if they're launching one drug per year. Is it imaginable that we could be doing 10 drugs per year that are lower cost or not?
It's going to be a different, like if you look at this year, companies have launched drugs virtually. We are one of them that we had to do a launch in April, May, in the middle of a pandemic, and we did it differently. And we tried to access to both healthcare professionals and patients through other means. And these are the learnings I was talking about that we need to check in the future. And indeed, the industry focusing on orphan drugs, like Rob was saying, and now we see that we have to address that full spectrum from public health issues to those super maybe space travelers options, and these will be the strategic choices that we will have to make in the future, and hopefully we'll make the right ones.
Mike, I would like to come in here. You asked about things changing and maybe the model changing and stuff. And I was thinking that COVID showed a very interesting dynamics, which, if I understand, is new. COVID basically showed that things can happen fast. And normally in medicine on population level, things don't happen that fast. In war, it can happen fast. If you have a new sort of bio weapon or something like that, then you need to come up with an antidote or a cure fast. But like in a normal peaceful setting, we got a dynamics which was very, very different. Like normally in the pharma industry, people project changes in population, people project changes in whatnot. Now there was a change that came in during half a year or a year, depending on who you ask. This caused a lot of things, one of which is now people came out with basically a new drug based on research that had done before in 1 year, which is pretty fast. Secondly, I see no reason why the frequency of these kind of malaises that comes on a large scale could not be higher. We had SARS-1, SARS-2. maybe we get into a situation where we would have a new pandemic not coming in every 100 or 10 years, but coming in every year. This means a great opportunity to sort of have a much, much faster dynamic. It also means that I read there were 27,000 journal papers on COVID, and there were high-level journals saying that they have a response in 6 days. Well, I've been in the science for a long time, and when I get a sort of difficult manuscript, it's really, really hard to sort of get into it in 6 days. So it means that there has been a shift in the dynamics of how you evaluate data and insight also. So what I'm bringing to the conversation is a faster dynamic may be based on the fact that the Earth is now a more labile system, if you want. And that's both a curse, but also maybe an opportunity. And I would not be surprised if it changes a lot of the intrinsic and underlying dynamics of everything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think certainly the kind of Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech kind of thing has shown that hypothesis about needing to be able to respond quicker with a vaccine to situations has kind of borne fruit, and I think we're all grateful that a kind of prospective technology has worked as well as it has. But I guess where the time's running away from us as well very quickly. One thing, maybe a provocative question, is if you could change, one thing in pharma, today, I'd be interested if you could, wave your magic wand and say that, yeah, I wish this wasn't the way it is, or I wish this was, this way. What would that one thing be? Maybe with reference to your own company or to the industry in general. I don't know who wants to go first with that one.
I can go first. It's dangerous. Yeah. Please, Rob, go first.
Yeah. I was about to say, I think the one thing that I'd really like to see change is the relationship between pharma industry and the population in general, and that level of trust. And, some of the things that need to be communicated, and we can see it happening in anti-infectives, for instance, where there's no profit motive, there's going to be no innovation. And the general population are going to have to realize that it is actually the profit motive that generates all the innovation that's made all the differences to human health, and to get comfortable with that. Otherwise, we're in the situation with anti-infectives where nobody wants to develop an anti-infective because they can't actually make it work commercially afterwards.
Yeah. Carine, and certainly that AML fund that you mentioned, I think would be, potentially an interesting sort of X Prize like fund for an antibiotic developer. But yeah, Carine.
Well, I was going a little bit along the lines of Rob, like that trust thing. Maybe something that I would like to change in the industry and in my company for sure is we need to keep the science. We need to continue to be a data-driven industry. Like, we are not entertainment, etc. We treat diseases or we prevent diseases. So we need to keep the science. What we are lacking is the emotional connection that the entertainment industry has, for example, with our public or our customers or the patients or the people we serve, at least. And this is really trying to connect or to ally that strong science with a very strong emotional connection.
That's right. It's very interesting. You mean from a trust perspective, or also from an insight perspective?
From all perspectives, but yeah. Because it would create the trust, it would provide the insights, and it would create that connection that we are remote, we are not liked, but everybody utilizes us, kind of so it's yeah.
Necessary evil, yeah, for sure.
If I had a magic wand, that's what I would like to create.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and Edward?
I think COVID and the generation of the vaccine technology is actually a teachable moment for society of the value that pharma companies bring. Of course, there are lots of people trying to take credit for this, including politicians, but really it's the biotech innovation platform that has generated these advances.
Sure. Edward. Sorry.
So I was thinking about what I wanted to say. I would like to make human biology simpler. That would make my life much easier. But seriously, my magic wand would be to find a lot of cascades where you can use a platform technology to really drive efficiency industry-wide. I think that the trust has two dimensions. One dimension which is rational and one dimension which is irrational. The rational trust you can sort of deal with data. The irrational part you can never treat with data. It doesn't matter what you do there. And the magic wand I would like to try to use to move the needle a little bit more from the irrational to the rational, if possible.
That's a really interesting point about whether the irrational is based on the sort of lack of rationality, or whether there are other drivers there, for sure. I wish we had more time, because it feels like we're sort of diving into some areas that you know, we would have a really rich theme of conversation for the rest of the evening. But I want to be mindful. I want to thank each of you for your thoughtful contributions and for being part of the panel. So Carine, Rob, Edward, thank you so much for being part of this, and I always look forward to the next conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike, for.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thanks, folks. That was excellent.